Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
I kind of messed that one up. Hello, welcome everybody to Night's the Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda. Wonderful Tuesday, last day of April 2024. Look, you know, we're not perfect every time, and this was just one of those times. Hopefully everybody is doing well. Glad to be back with you on a Tuesday. Of course, we have been busy this last couple of weeks because we've been moving out. A lot of stuff to move out of our studio, but we are finished. Everything has been vacated, as the patrons know, and I'm actually turning in the keys tomorrow. So it's kind of the end of an era. A little sad, of course, but you know, for the better, hopefully. Well, hello and welcome everybody. Ben says, love the haircut. Thank you, Ben. I got my haircut like Saturday or something, or Sunday. So, yep, pretty fresh. The lady who does it does a good job. I make sure to tip her well. Jackal, what is up? Hello, hello, hello. DJ Hyper Duckman, what's going on? William, hello, hello. Kyle, shout out to Kyle. Supporting the adventure. Love that blue badge. Perfect time to do some listening while you get ready for a hex call. Sweet. Yeah. I do have some thoughts on hex crawls. That was actually one of the potential topics today. Of course, our topics are chosen by our Knights of Last Call patrons who have access to our Knights of Last Call Patreon Discord exclusively. And one of the things that they get to do is vote on topics. By the way, these aren't topics I suggest. These are topics that are suggested by the members of the Patreon who then vote. And I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'll step in and do a stream anyways, but a lot of times I like to leave it up to them. But one of the options, Ryan, our good friend Ryan Dale, is in the midst of preparing for doing some hex crawling and had some thoughts and comments and questions. So you're in good company, Kyle. Solana, good evening to you as well. Pepper, hello, hello. Beowulf, welcome. Sorry about missing the poll. That would be ironic, Axe, but you know, we were here. I missed the button, but we were here. Hello, Albstein. Thaddeus, first time catching the stream live. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. Hopefully you can enjoy the chat, ask some questions, get some feedback. Jackal, love me some Butcher Block. Got to get over to Crushbone once you get enough levels. Are you a dwarf? If you're leveling in Butcher Block, are you a dwarf? Oh, you're from the UK. Okay, great. Well, wonderful. Thank you. Glad to have your member. Glad to have you here. Glad to have your subscription. What is up, Chris? Good to see you. Yes, it's a bit sad. I mean, you know, look, it was pretty expensive. I'm not going to lie. You know, when you take into account, I mean, we were up there once a week. Let's call it what it is. Now, of course, originally we were up there more often when we were doing all the video recordings and stuff for the Rise of the Runelords Adventure Path, and we were doing the combat and tactics videos. We used to be up there a lot, but in the last year or two, since we've been basically doing the Tuesday streams with Bob and Aaron, and then we did the Root actual play, but since we've been doing those, we're up there once a week. And when you do the math, on the rent for the studio, the insurance for the studio, the utilities for the studio, the internet for the studio, I was probably paying close to $300 to $325 every time we streamed from the studio. That was my overhead cost. And you all are amazing and awesome, and people come out and support us like crazy. It's awesome. But getting $300 in tips and stuff just to break even is pretty brutal. It was a situation where I was, we're not doing this to make money, which is fine. I'm fine taking the loss. We're here to just, make the show and the presentation that I wanted to make. And I wanted to have a really cool studio setup. So as best as I could, and as best as I knew how to, I tried to put together something that I thought I could be proud of. And even if the wider internet, some of you may have appreciated it, but even if the wider internet didn't, I'm still really proud of what we put together. So, sad about it, but also too, for me, it's a very strange situation, because before the studio that we know from Knights of Last Call, of course, I had the original studio where we started off with in our Rise of the Runelords AP, but that was my photography studio. So I have had some form of studio for the last 5 or so years. So now, for the first time ever, I don't have this rent overhead, and I don't have an extra space. So it's kind of it's kind of an interesting, weird spot for me. Alia's here, and yeah, it's been a while since we've seen you, Alia. We haven't really seen you much on the Discord either. So hopefully you've been getting into some good trouble. Rule of Cool, welcome. I saw you in RFC the other day. Good to see you back. KC, yes, we are back. Tuesday streams. I apologize, everybody. We're all moved out, so I'm back. I'm back on the clock. Tomasz, welcome. All the way from Poland. Now, Rule of Cool says, wasn't this topic already discussed? Yes. So I don't know if Colin had some specific things. He was the one who put the topic up, and everybody voted for it. It won handedly. So maybe there's some additional ideas or thoughts or things that people want to talk about. I have some stories and anecdotes and some ideas. I'm not 100% sure what we covered in time management. I know that when we talked about that, it was specifically in the context of like tracking turns and stuff, as Gary Gygax would say, and really, managing the duration of things. I think this is a broader question about like, and again, I could be wrong here, but about like, how do you make it so that your games feel like they're actually taking a real amount of time? Not just days and weeks, but like months and years of gameplay. I could be wrong. No, is this about when the GM becomes a chrono mage? No, it is not. Although I think that was the very last AD&D second edition product I ever bought, which was called Chronomancer back in like the late 90s, 99 maybe, 98, 99, something like that. Maybe. I think it was called Chronomancer. Hello, Sorrel. Hello, Mr. Rawlings. Glad to have you here. Moonlit Mongrel should be back on track financially to be able to join the Discord again and participate in all the great conversations. We'd love to have you back. We understand some people do have to leave occasionally due to other financial obligations, and that is regrettable. We appreciate every dollar that we get. But of course, even if you're not a member of the Patreon, or you were a member of the Patreon and now you're not, or maybe it's just not in the cards that you can support us, we'd love to have you here anyways, just to be able to join these conversations. Mr. Williams, welcome. Good to see you here, buddy. Kyle took my random encounter table design stream and ran with building out a halfway decent hex crawl area around a similar encounter table. Sweet. Awesome. That's what I wanted you to do. Oh, you are playing a level of dwarf cleric. Wonderful. It's great. Oh, you got to go to chessboard, baby. Well, I don't, you're probably still too low level, but chessboard's a great place for clerics. Let's see here. Mark says, now I can afford good thumbnails and titles. I sincerely doubt so. I hope this covers generational play and large timescales. Well, maybe it will. I don't know. We'll let you all decide. I think the most important element of the passage of time is the GM tracking what might be happening off camera, especially with villains. Excited to hear your thoughts on this. We will talk about this a little bit. I somewhat agree with you, but also somewhat don't disagree with you. So we'll get into that. KC says that's too much minutia, anyways, for his taste. Been feeling a bit antisocial. That's okay. It's it's been a weird time for me as well. So I don't blame you. It's been a little tough for me as well. So, did you miss my thoughts on the Guardian playtest class? You did not miss my thoughts on the Guardian playtest class because I went live yesterday as soon as it dropped, and it was during my lunch break, so I only had like an hour or so before I had to get back to work and get to some meetings. So I didn't get a chance, but I went through every feat and every power of the commander, which won the poll. So I haven't actually really read the Guardian yet. Obviously, I've seen stuff, but what is up, Ben?
Benetip $10. One of the big issues time management is that when you are not running 1-to-1, the temptation to simply hand wave things like healing and training is very strong. PLS discuss your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that I think Ben's absolutely right. Thank you, Ben, for that support. And so what Ben is saying is that one of the issues with time is that if you're not running 1-to-1, and what Ben means there is basically that 1 day in real time is 1 day in the campaign. So that means that time is passing even if you're not necessarily playing. It becomes really, really easy to just say, 30 days pass. And because you guys need to heal up, or you guys are doing something and it takes 60 days, it's really easy to just elide the time. And I think that you're right that can make time not seem important. But I do think that there's a subtlety to that. I think that there's an element to that we can sort of work on. Because the one thing is, and I'll get into this, but one of the things that I think can be a problem is that if you're too granular with time, the logistics of managing every single day become too much and become overpowering. I think the bigger mistake is when people shortcut time. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think the problem is when they shortcut time, but they do it in the way that you're describing, which is hand waving it. And that, I think, is the bigger problem. It's not necessarily, I'm fine with basically doing what we would call time jumps or montages, kind of spoiler alert, but I don't want to just hand wave it, because if I hand wave it, then it doesn't seem important. And it's just like it's just an abstract number going up. It becomes kind of almost like, hit point healing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's technically there, but it doesn't really matter because you just kind of go, okay, yeah, everybody uses medicine and you heal up, right? In fact, that's actually a really good comparison, because in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, healing up using the medicine skill requires 10-minute periods of time, and there's feats that make this more efficient and faster. But a lot of GMs just hand wave it. And so it doesn't really matter whether it takes 20 minutes or 60 minutes, because nothing's really going to happen. And I think that's the problem. The problem is if you're going to have time, then time needs to matter. So, but I will definitely get more into that as we get into it. But let's see. You did not miss much tabletop. We're in here. And this is kind of what I thought of maybe potentially that they were really focusing on here in this particular example, which is right where you have characters who go from 1 to 12 in 12 weeks of game time, right? And it breaks verisimilitude. Although I question whether it breaks verisimilitude at all anyways, because getting back to Ben's point, in modern D&D games, what is leveling up anyways? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have any sort of bearing. It's a completely gamist notion. There is no distinguishing characteristic. Now, if you go back to, let's say, original Dungeons and Dragons, maybe Ben, if he's still here, can correct me on this. It was something like a week or something of training time for each level. So, like, if you were going to level 4 or 5, maybe it was 5 weeks. Maybe it's months. I don't remember. It was something insane. And so, for your character to be higher level, you literally had to take a ton of time. But again, I will sort of break it 3 to 4 weeks. So that's almost a month per level. So like Think about that. That's crazy, right? I mean, and I think it's crazy in a good way. And we'll talk about what the problem with that is. And I don't think there's a problem with it. We'll just say it's a problem in the modern context. Specifically, the reason why time management or time doesn't work in most people's games is a combination of 4 factors. Number 1 is the system itself. Number 2, the game master. Number 3, the players. And number 4, and probably the biggest offender, the adventures themselves. And oftentimes the adventure path itself. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a story, actually. And it was one of the first times that I remember feeling very constrained and having my players feel very constrained by the adventure itself. So I grew up playing 2nd edition D&D, AD&D, and there were no like adventure paths back then. And when I did buy an adventure, it was a module, or I made it myself because I didn't have a lot of money and there wasn't a lot as much option back then. But I got my subscription to Dungeon Magazine. Sometimes if I found a really cool dungeon or cool little adventure inside Dungeon Magazine, you would run it. But there was no idea of part one of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6, right? And even the adventures, which were sort of thematically linked, like in the old days, like Against the Giants, G1, G2, G3. These were really more standalone in their presentation. So that's how I played. That's how I grew up playing D&D. And when I went to 3rd edition, it was very much the same. Then I remember that 3.5 came out, 3.5 edition, and the new campaign setting came out, Eberron, and we were really excited to play Eberron, and I thought it was really interesting. And so we got together and we played this Eberron campaign. And Eberron, was very much more sort of a action movie, pulp fantasy, kind of magic punk, style to it. And when they released Eberron, it came with this trio of adventures. I think the first adventure was called Shadows of the Last War. The second adventure was called Whispers of the Vampire's Blade. And the third was called Grasp of the Emerald Claw. Those were the 3 adventures. And they were essentially an adventure path. We didn't really know that term yet. That term really hadn't become a thing yet because Paizo hadn't really started branding it as a thing. But there was this idea that these were 3, they look like they're 3 adventures, right? But they weren't. They were really just one really big adventure. Okay, fine. And by the way, over the course of these 3 adventures, you're gaining like 9 levels. Okay. Well, at the time, there was a new class that got added to Dungeons and Dragons. It was called the Artificer. And this was tied to Eberron. And back then, in that day and age, if you wanted to make magical items, it cost you gold, but it also cost you experience. Your character literally had to, kind of infuse the magical item with your soul energy or whatever you want to call it. But the point is, it cost experience, and it wasn't necessarily a trivial amount of your XP. It could potentially maybe make it so that you don't level up at the same time as everybody else in your party. So it was, a real cost to be bared. Well, the Artificer, one of the things about the Artificer was that they were basically the magical item creating class, as one would think from the Artificer. And so what the Artificer got in 3rd edition, 3.5 edition, was each level they got a bank or a pool of XP that they could only use for making magical items. And it was use it or lose it. So you would get, I don't remember exactly what it was, but maybe they give you 50 XP to spend at level 1. And when you go to level 2, if you haven't spent that 50 XP, right, it's like, I don't know, it's like PTO or something. It doesn't roll over. And so when you get to 2nd level, you get a new bank of XP. And the idea is that you would use that bank of XP to create a bunch of magical items. Very cool. It was allowed the Artificer to make way more magical items than other classes and do so at not any real cost to their advancement. In fact, it's almost like what they should be doing, right? Very cool. Very fun. And Tim of Knights of Last Call fame, Tim Carpenter played an Artificer named Alder something. I think Alder was his character's name. Everybody was, and we were used to playing games the way that we had been playing them for a long time. Well, here's what happened. We started playing this adventure, but this was a more modern adventure. Sure, it was like 2004, but already the wheels were turning in the sort of grand scheme of thing. So what does that mean? Well, it meant that the adventure was exciting and action-packed, and there were dastardly villains with villainous plans afoot, and it was a rat race, right? The PCs were essentially always playing catch-up. They were always chasing after the villain, right, who left a note saying that the princess is in another castle. And very quickly, over the course of that first adventure, the PCs gained 2 or 3 levels, and they were suddenly level 3 or level 4. And during the course of that adventure, there was no downtime. There was no time to make magical items. I should point out that in 3rd edition, a magical item cost a magical item took 1 day for every 1,000 GP worth of the item that you were creating. And so that meant to create, say, a +1 longsword, which cost 2,000 gold, or a +1 armor, which cost 1,000 gold, you needed a day or 2 days. Well, they didn't even have that much time to spend. So now suddenly they're like 4th level. They've got some money, and they've got but each time that the Alder, the artificer, was leveling up, Tim would almost be upset because he's like, I didn't even get a chance to use any of my XP bank. I lost it. It was use it or lose it. And so I'm losing it because I didn't get a chance to lose it. But how could I possibly say, hey guys, can we stop for a week or 2 while I make magical items for us? And it's like, well, we can't do that. Why? Well, because the villain just got onto a train and they're on their way, a lightning rail, and they're on their way to Sharn, and we need to, catch a ride on the airship to cut them off before they get there. It's like, okay, fine. We get to the end of the adventure. Okay, but now here's the problem. Back in the day, I'm not saying that having time pressure is necessarily a bad problem. It does happen. But in the modern day where you level relatively quickly and fast, that might mean that in a given adventure, you're going to level 1, 2, 3 times, and suddenly you're level 4. So that already is kind of like a very accelerated pace of progress, because these adventures themselves, they don't take place over months of time. They might take place over days of time. And so your character gains so much changes about your character mechanically in such a short and condensed period of time because you're leveling up so much. But here's the real rub. After we were finished with that first adventure, we had played adventures before that were, pretty self-contained and took place over a relatively short period of time. Maybe they didn't gain 3 levels. They might have only gained 1 or 2. But the fact was, once that adventure was over, it was self-contained. That was a module. That was the abandoned Dwarven Forge. And the group went in and they fought the orcs, and they fought the Durgar, and they made their way down to the bottom to the Black Lake, and they fought Nightscale, the Black Dragon. And when the dragon had been slain, the treasures of the Dwarf King were theirs to plunder and to rescue from the clutches of the dragon. And that was it. End scene. Movie credits roll. That's it. Now, sure, the story with those characters wasn't over. We were going to go do another adventure. But from the timeline of the threats and the counter threats and the plot lines, things were done. They were wrapped up. A bow was tied on them. They won. Full stop. End of movie. But the way that the modern adventure was designed, going back to this Eberron example, and this is very similar to most adventure paths, when Adventure 1 ended, it wasn't like the credits to the movie. It was just the end of Act 1 of the movie, because nothing was wrapped up. In fact, if anything, the tension, the stakes had been raised. And the only way, seemingly, that modern game designers know how to raise the stakes is by basically saying, and you're running out of time. And so everything became more about rushing. And so even though the adventure was over and Tim had leveled up a couple of times, suddenly they're like, okay, so it's between adventures. And it was like, yeah, but the adventure ended with us realizing that the real villain was about to enact his new plan. And we had to rush over to the next location of the adventure to follow the breadcrumbs. And immediately my group started to be like, WTF. And especially Tim with this artificer, because no one felt like they had any amount of time to do anything, because the plot of the story was just go, 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 because it was the only way that they knew how to impress upon you urgency and it was sort of like sort of a cheap way to make the world seem exciting and dangerous. And so we went into the second adventure. Now, I should point out that very quickly in the second adventure, the campaign went right off the rails. I've told the story before, but it's called Whispers of the Vampire's Blade, and there's like a magic blade that has like a spirit of something in it, and it's possessing someone. And of course, there's a scene where, you know, the vampire's blade is supposed to get away or something like that. But, you know, I didn't fudge it or do anything like that, and the group ended up destroying it, and the adventure quickly, path kind of quickly took a hard left turn when it was supposed to go right, and things kind of progressed from there. But the biggest problem is that the pace of the adventure did not allow the players, in good conscience, any amount of time to use and to breathe between these moments and these adventures. Combine that with a hyper-accelerated leveling rate, and suddenly, in the blink of an eye, 1 month had passed in the game world, right? Not even, you know, not even enough time for a season to pass. And by the end of it, the characters were, you know, level 9 or something. Maybe even close to level 10 or level 8 or something, 8 or 9 or 10. And you look around and you go, man, our characters are like halfway done with the journey from levels 1 to 20. And also, we are maybe not 10 times more powerful, but I probably have 10 times more hit points. Well, maybe I am 10 times more powerful than I was just a month ago. And of course, there's no, you know, leveling now is completely gamist. There is no reason that my character got 10 times stronger. They had trained their whole life to become a level 1 fighter, and then in 1 month they're a level 10 fighter. And for no real reason. And so it can just feel very jarring. It can feel very weird. And if it does feel that way, it's because it should feel weird. Because the entire system of Dungeons and Dragons, which you're still playing today, if you're playing any sort of D20 game, Pathfinder 2, D&D, 5e, whatever, was based off of it's fundamentally just copied and pasted from the Dungeons and Dragons of the 1970s, where everything was exactly the same. We went level 1 to 20, but things were very different. You leveled so much more slowly. You needed so much more time to heal, to research. God forbid you wanted to make a magical item. As Ben was alluding to earlier, it took you potentially months of in-game time, okay, in the world time, to level because you had to train. What made a fighter go from being level 2 to level 3 wasn't that they got 6 encounters. It was that after 6 encounters, they had enough field experience that they could go and work and practice and train, and then they would become level 3. And it just creates this much bigger pattern of time play that allows you to sort of really appreciate that things are changing. But of course, you know, that story was to demonstrate the critical point. As I said, there's sort of 4 reasons why I think these time problems occur. But I think the biggest offender is the modern day adventure. It's the modern day adventure path for sure, but it's also the modern day adventure. These adventures are jammed into a very tight temporal space. There's always a sort of tick-tock time pressure. While never actually being, vague enough, being vague enough that it'll never actually cause you any problems, of course. And then once one adventure ends, the next adventure basically immediately begins. Okay? So to that end, you don't have any time. And again, most people are playing these games. They want to respect their character. We're mostly playing good characters, even if you're not good and heroic. If there's always an existential crisis around the bend, then how can you possibly take time off? It just doesn't even seem appropriate. It doesn't seem right. And it's like, no, we got to keep going, right? We got to keep going. And in fact, kind of spiraling a little bit, but this is one of the big problems that happen, let's say, with Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2 is, you're playing your Pathfinder 1 game, and oh my God, the Noali is about to destroy Sandpoint. We have to stop her, and she's going to release the demon. She's going to release Malfa Sheknor tonight. And the group goes into Thistletop, and they're fighting their way through. And then they kind of go, hey, you know what? I'm running low on hit points and spells, so we should probably go back to town and sleep. But of course, you know, as players, you're like, no, we're heroes. Also, the stakes are here. Noali has to be stopped tonight before she releases Malfa Sheknor, and it's too late. We need to press on, even though you're out of spells and even though we're low on hit points. And so the group does. And what ends up happening? Well, one of two things. The GM fudges, or the players die because they don't have enough resources to make it happen. And the game isn't designed to support that. It never was. And so Pathfinder 2nd Edition changed that because they said, well, you know, that is a problem. And we want our characters to be able to go, and never actually have to turn around and go back. So what they did is create infinite healing out of combat. It's not instant, but it might as well be. And for spellcasters who work off of daily spells, even if they completely run out of spells, which could still happen, you have your focus spells, you have your cantrips, you're able to participate and add something somewhat meaningful to the conversation, to the combat, or to the encounter, or whatever. And so what ends up happening is the game system is now designed to support this hyper accelerated version of the game. And while there are still some, you know, vestigial elements within Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I do think that they have, by and large, while still having some unfortunate callbacks to the old original version of the game, you are still, you know, the game has tried to make it so that time doesn't really matter. And so this is where we get to system, because I said before that the adventures can be a problem. But the other problem, and Damian Williams said this very eloquently, Pathfinder 2 fixed this problem by making downtime activities suck. So that's the other part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that characters taking time off creates a problem in the system, right? Because, and I always talk about this here, what gets rewarded gets repeated. These games, Pathfinder 2 in particular, want to reward what? They want to reward going on adventure paths. They want to reward your heroic fantasy characters going on doing heroic fantasy adventures. And so the games are set up that that's how you earn experience. That's how you earn meaningful treasure, money, etc. The other alternatives are so bad by comparison that it means that even if you did have a lot of time on your hands, it really wouldn't make any sort of meaningful material difference. I mean, sure, there might be fluffy bullshit that you pull off, but by and large, it doesn't really matter what you do, because the downtime actions are designed in such a way that they can't disrupt the game. And why? Because, again, Pathfinder 2 is trying to create that sort of homogeneous experience where if one party finishes their adventure and they're level 4, and then they go straight into the next adventure, versus another party, which is level 4, and they have a few months of downtime before the next adventure. Well, if the game had downtime activities that could really make a substantial difference to your character, then you would have a situation from a game system integration standpoint where you might have some parties who have taken a ton of downtime and therefore have a lot of power, versus parties who have had no downtime and are significantly underpowered. And this could lead to a situation where you have GMs out on Reddit and the Paizo forum boards bitching because they're like, my party's so broken, and they were able to, you know, face roll this entire, you know, adventure. And it's like, well, why? Well, because they got a bunch of, you know,
Benna tipped $10.
What up, Ben?
Probably the best way to handle time is to not be too dogmatic with it in any direction. Dilating time can be good for getting to the good bits, but focusing on things like interlude scenes, Fabu, or guide and comfort, Avatar.
All right, so Ben said probably the best way to handle time is to not be too dogmatic with it in any direction. Dilating time can be good for getting to the good bits, but focusing on things like interlude scenes from Fabula Ultima or guide and comfort from Avatar. And Ben, I completely agree with you. I think that even going back to first edition, training is a great example of that. Because, we play role-playing games for the mechanical interface, but we do it also so that we can interact with the fiction. And, if you're even playing an old school game like first edition AD&D, describing how your character goes on this training, you can almost imagine a Rocky training montage. And it might only take 10 minutes or something at the table or 5 minutes at the table. But the fact of the matter is it's going to paint a picture. It's going to feel like a defining moment. And so even if, weeks and months pass, it can feel like weeks and months are passing. And so, I agree with you. I think you do need to be flexible with it, especially if you want to get to the good bits. But the key is to ideally have a system that has meaningful bits that you can actually do in those interregnum periods that isn't just, okay, well, you guys have 3 months off between adventures, which already just sounds like such a weird thing to do. How would you know how much time you have off before you even do it? And so as a result, like it can feel very, very strange and very, very, very weird, and very pressured. So to your point, also, another story I will give is we played a 4th edition campaign many years ago. And in that 4th edition campaign, the 4th edition is 1 to 30, and there's 3 tiers: heroic tier 1 to 10, paragon tier 11 to 20, epic tier 21 to 30. And during each tier, things were kind of moving and shaking. Now, there was still some time between the characters being able to do things, but by and large, the characters were fairly, what I would say, is busy. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't starting up and doing things. Like, so for example, when the campaign started, Tim Carpenter had a character named Nerix, and Nerix was a rogue, and Nerix started like making connections with all these kind of neutral, shady kind of characters throughout the course of the campaign. And he was trying to basically establish his own mercantile empire under the pseudonym of the Jester. And this is something that he was doing and focusing on. But what we did at the end of the heroic tier, after the group had sort of achieved a major victory, you could almost think heroic tier as being like a movie. I mean, it took, probably, close to, 6 months of play, or 7 months of play. But heroic tier, you had 3 adventures, and each one was like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And there was definitely some slow parts, some quiet parts between each adventure. And what we did by the way, for those slow parts, going back to Ben's point about the Fab U and the interlude scenes. Now, of course, 4th edition doesn't have the modern tech like Avatar or Fabula Ultima. I mean, Fabula Ultima and Avatar, what Ben is describing, we've talked about these a million times on the stream, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. But interlude scenes are literally basically campfire scenes in the midst of your adventure. You might be out in the wilderness. You could be in the middle of the dungeon, right? And, you've basically found a save point, in the dungeon, and you're setting up camp for the night to recover. And the interlude scene is literally 2 characters having a conversation. Now, is this completely fluffy? Does it mean nothing? No, because interlude scenes are what allow your character to establish bonds with other characters or ideas, and bonds are a mechanical resource that your character can use in order to sort of build on that. We just talked about Girls by Moonlight, and Girl by Moonlight has links, and it's a very similar idea to Fabula Ultima. And you have to build those using your downtime actions. It's a great opportunity to role play. It's a great opportunity to show your character's development, their arc, their story. Similarly, in Avatar Legends, guide and comfort, I mean, it could be a brief moment, a touching conversation, but guide and comfort could also represent a wide amount of time. It could represent an evening stroll through the park. It could represent 2 characters taking a vacation. And that entire thing is represented by one action. And why do you do this? Because that's how you heal in Avatar. The way you heal your character up in Avatar isn't you just, hand wave 10 minutes of treatment wounds and you're full. in Avatar, in order to get your conditions restored and get your things restored in a healthy, productive manner, you have to have other PCs guide and comfort you. So this is really integrated into the way that the game is working. Again, why system is so important. Now, of course, Interludes is about touchy-feely feelings, and guide and comfort is about touchy-feely feelings. But again, that doesn't necessarily have to be a modern thing. As I was saying, first edition AD&D showcases that it also cares about these moments. Sure, it's much more utilitarian. It's much more gritty. It's your training montage. It's your training scene where you literally have to pay gold and time to work with someone to level up. In order to actually get better at fighting, get better at casting spells. This, by the way, answers the questions. I've seen this since the 90s, where people are like, I don't understand why fighting orcs makes me a better wizard. And it's like, and they're like, shouldn't I like be studying in a library and like researching old scrolls? And the answer is absolutely you should be, which is what you did in first edition AD&D. The only reason you went and adventured was basically to earn the gold, and because the game had this mechanic called experience points that basically said you had to at least do some of the adventuring stuff in order to qualify. But it was very much a gamist concept. Experience has always been a gamist concept. But then it brought it back to the fiction by saying, yep, your wizard, you would love to be able to pay to have access to the, Arduin Grimoire and go study with the sages of the ages. But that shit costs money. It's like going to school. It's like you want to get your master's degree? Where's the coin? Karama says, weaponizing the power of friendship. Absolutely. That's the real power of friendship, is how you do weaponize it. I like the rainbow. That's really good. I mean, it is a way of weaponizing it. For sure. Thank you, Karama. But I mean, yes, I mean, I know you're joking, but also it's important for me, not for everybody. I've learned this the hard way. For me, it's a lot more fun at the table to be having those conversations about our friendship when I know that I'm doing it not just because I want to role play, but I'm doing it because I want to role play, but I also want to, do the thing and build the mechanic, and I want the bond, or I want the guide and comfort. I want the condition clear. I think I like that. That's the best of both worlds to me. That's the role-playing game. That's the role-playing game. That, for me, that is, at its heart. So I don't completely disagree with you. Ben says, even Blade Runner has this. When a Blade Runner is broken, their fellows can perform a manipulate check to get them back from the brink. Once again, it allows the game's pacing to slow down. Absolutely. And, Blade Runner, I think is a Year Zero engine game. Forbidden Lands has this to a certain extent, where in Forbidden Lands, your character, if they're broken, can potentially suffer a critical injury. And a critical injury could potentially take days or even weeks to heal. Now, I'll be the first to admit it's not a realistic timeline. A character does not recover from a shattered, broken leg in, 2 to 3 weeks, even with modern medicine. But it's a good balance between making it feel like a real time. Like if it was broken leg and you're fixed in one or 2 days, it would just be so ridiculous that it wouldn't even matter. But if it was 8 months, I also feel like that starts to just feel like too much of a hassle and too much of a drain. But they've managed to pick a number, which is still pretty aggressive, but not so realistic that it does feel like you're in this kind of rough spot where it's like, yeah, you might have to suffer for a little bit with your broken leg before we can get it, repaired or healed. And you're going to feel that time. And there's going to be a temptation to say, can we just take 2 weeks off? And it's like, well, we're in the middle of the wilderness. We got to get back to a town and then find a time. Yeah, okay. But if we take 2 weeks off, there might be things that happen in that period of time. And 2 weeks is enough time for a game master to have a good grasp of what might happen. Whereas like 8 months is a crazy amount of time, right? The GM might be like, wow, like the entire campaign might be different in 8 months. That's a lot to put on a GM in the middle of a campaign. So, but 1 or 2 weeks, I think a lot of GMs can roll with those kind of punches. I don't remember what I was talking about. So, man, what was I Oh, 4th edition. So in 4th edition D&D, Avatar, as Ben said, has the guide and comfort moves. You have interludes and Fabula Ultima, and those are important mechanically. Those things are not important mechanically in 4th edition D&D. So we didn't really do them at the session. At the session, we focused on playing the game, doing the combats, doing the skill challenges, solving the encounters, the puzzles, the challenges of play, all the stuff that you would expect to do. Between game sessions, we had an email thread. This is before Discord. Nowadays, it would have totally been Discord. And players would write little vignettes. They would write little stories. In some cases, literally called interludes. And basically, they would sort of like show a little flashback to like the last session, maybe, or maybe it's representing the time we end with the players, going down into Thunderspire Labyrinth, and they've just passed through the Minotaur lair, and they're going down into the Caverns of Blood, and we stop for the night, and the group long rests. Well, someone writes a short story called Interlude, in a dark, dark cave, and it's just a story of their character and another character, and they're writing this little vignette about what is happening. In fact, we're here live, but let me see if I can find this real quick. Now, sometimes this is, present, and other times it's flashback, right? And so I think that's what's really, really interesting. And let's take a look here. I'm just trying to find a good. Yeah, so here we go. Here, I'm going to share this with everybody. Hold on a sec here. All right, I'm not going to read all of this, but so this email here was entitled Let me actually change this. All right. So this is a short story that Mr. Smith wrote. It was called Camp Beneath the Shadow Keep. If you've ever played 4th edition D&D, then you know that the very first adventure is Keep on the Shadowfell. And, this is an interlude that Aaron wrote, and he sent it to our entire party, me and the rest of the party. The faint light of the wizard's staff. He wasn't the wizard, by the way. He was a warlord. Did little to alleviate the shadow and the gloom of the crypt. And what pale light could be gleaned from the arcane instrument? It provided no warmth or comfort from the chill of death that surrounded the party. Despite the fallen knight's words of peace and safety, William could find no rest in the bowels of Shadowfell Keep. And, his story little continued. And it's just this little brief moment, this vignette of what, his night was like, right? And then another player, my buddy Ross, wrote a little story about his wizard, Moros. That's actually how I found this. I knew that he had written in this. And this is more of a flashback. This is him showcasing how he came to even be with the party. All right. So this is an example of where my group in a game system, which has no support for this whatsoever, took these moments to add in this extra time that we couldn't necessarily spend during the session. Now, all that's to say that when we ended the heroic tier, aka levels 1 through 10, we literally took this massive time jump forward. Mouse Guard does this in its own way, where in Mouse Guard, you play for the better part of a year, and at the end of the year, you go into what's called the winter phase, and it's literally a session of play where you really don't go on adventure. Kind of an admin and upkeep, but it's also like a storytelling session where you sort of celebrate the achievements, the failures of the group. You kind of talk both in character and out of character about like what direction the campaign is going. And it creates these moments of time passing, right? Part of the way that we all understand time passing is the passing of seasons, the passing of holidays, right? These milestones that mark these important moments. And so when you're playing a game of Mouse Guard and you go and do an adventure or 2 or 3, and then suddenly winter is coming and it's the winter phase, it's like, oh, wow, so much has happened since last winter phase. And it kind of lets you really feel that, presence of time. In fact, one of the things one of the steps is kind of procedural. It's a Torchbearer inspired game, is your mouse ages, they're like, your birthday may not necessarily be in the winter, but the winter phase is a good time to remember that your mouse is a year older. And so you increment your age by 1 during the winter phase. And it is literally a session of just focusing on time passing. And you do this every handful of sessions because time is passing. So what we did, this is before Mouse Guard came out, in 4th edition is when the heroic phase ended. These were, new adventurers who had become very powerful. They become mighty heroes in the land. Now, Paragon tier in 4th edition is your characters are these, they aren't just the fighter, right? Or a fighter. They are the fighter, right? They are well known. They are a paragon of their class. They are a paragon of their virtues. So we took, years, and we basically took a session and we talked about what their characters were doing during that time. And here's the part about it that's really important. I used that to sort of change things up about their character. 4th edition didn't really have retraining rules. So that was an opportunity for me to in some cases change around people's characters, giving them an additional feat or a new power or a magical item, because years had passed in the game, but they had won their great victory, right? The movie ended at the end of heroic tier. And when we restarted again in Paragon tier, even though they were level 10 and now they're level 11, so from a game chronology standpoint, they're just 1 level higher, these characters felt incredibly different because years had passed. Now, Nerix was the head of the Jester's Network, and he had this vast mercantile army. William, the warlord, who had grown up dreaming to be a knight, was now a commander in the Fallcrest Guard, and had troops and stuff that he had been working with for years. And so when the second movie started, aka aka Paragon tier 11 through 20, it was like the idea was like years had passed and now a new threat is arising. And sure enough, the characters were kind of on the ball and on the spot and on the point for the next 8 to 9 levels. And when Paragon tier ended, okay, the characters were mighty super Paragon characters, right? Level 20. And the next level was level 21, epic. When that happened, okay, we took another break. And this time when we came back, William, Aaron's character, his warlord, started the campaign as a fresh-faced young boy right off the farm who dreamed of the ancient glory of ancient Netheril. By the time we got to epic, the time jump was like 25 years. And he was like an old man. Now we stole from Tolkien, and we said that his bloodline was of the ancient old bloodline of kings, so he's kind of like a pseudo Numenorian. So even though his character was like pushing 40 or 50, he still had the vim and vigor of a young man, aka he was still in good shape. And of course the Eladrin hadn't aged a day in any sort of stretch of the imagination. And so like when they first got back together, there was like the dwarf, the halfling, the Eladrin, and then the human, and everyone was kind of like poking fun at the human because he was an old man now. And Aaron's character had a wife and had a son, and these were massive changes that all felt in line with their character, but it felt like literally decades of time had passed, and it all was tied to what was happening in the game. So there's a way for you to do this. You just have to make it meaningful and do it in a way that the characters want to engage with. But the key here was that they weren't on an adventure path that necessarily was required that in order to, hey, I'm going to take 20 years off and go have a family and become the king of a kingdom and, whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, while you're doing that, Orcus rises up and kills everybody because you guys just dropped the ball, right? That would be like if you're playing like Rise of the Rune Lords. The Rune Lord is coming. And you get to like, you finish up adventure 4, You know, you're like, well, the Stone Army is defeated. And you're like, yes. And now the Eye of Avarice opens and the Rune Lord Karzug is about to, and you're like, yeah, we're going to take like 15 to 20 years off. You know, I want to start a family. I want to start a business. And it's like, wait, what? And then you're like, as a GM, you're like, I don't even know what to do here. Right. And so you're forced to keep the players, I don't know, you know, the attacks are coming at them and you're forcing them to react. And the players, you know, assuming they're good aligned or whatever, you know, heroic characters, they're not going to want to take 20 years off while the existential threat of a Rune Lord arising is just around the bend. Of course not. They're going to be like, no, we have to keep going. So it should not surprise you then that your campaigns don't have any time space to them. You haven't given the players any room or time to do it. The adventure hasn't given them any time or room to do it, and you haven't given them any incentive to want to do it because it just feels like it's pointless. Who cares if time passes? If 1 week passes for my character or 2 years passes for my character, nothing. If nothing is going to change about my character, about the world, then the time is meaningless. That's the real key to all of this. I'm not necessarily saying that like the players go, well, we're going to take, you know, like I really want to focus on, you know, taking a couple years and you're like, okay, well, 2 years passes. When we rejoin the campaign, everything around you is a wasteland because in that time, the Dark Prince rose to power because you guys were taking a vacation. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you know, then your players aren't going to fucking take 2 years off, right? So that's where the GM, as I said before, the adventure can certainly set the tone. The system can set the tone, but the GM sets the tone too. But at the same time, if the players take 5 months off or 6 months off or 2 years off, and you just, as Ben was alluding to earlier, if you just go, okay, cool, you take 2 years off. All right, so we get back to 2 years and you're like, nothing happened. You know, the characters didn't change, they didn't grow, nothing mechanically happened. All the same villains are just in their same boxes waiting to do the next thing that you had planned on your to-do list of villainous activities. If you're going to do that, then time also doesn't matter. Sure, you can say that 2 years happened. You can say that 5 years happened. But if nothing really actually happened, if nothing really changed, then did it? Not really. It's just a number on a page at that point. So I think that the key there is to really think about how do you figure out a way to not punish the players, but to meaningfully allow time passing to feel like time is passing. Ben says, in classic Kung Fu movies, yeah, taking 2 years to train to take out the villain is a staple. Absolutely. I mean, we see this even today. I mean, look at the Rocky movies. Most of the movie is just him training to do one fight. And people love those movies. And there's just, you know, history is just replete with these scenes. And it's not just Kung Fu movies. There's a ton of moments that we would just basically say are downtime. And it allows this sort of passing of time to happen. So, now, Mind Blown says, I've been playing a game of D&D for the last 4 years, and in-game only 5 months have passed. Now, Mind Blown, that also seems overly tedious to me. Now, I mean, you guys may love it, and maybe you guys are literally playing day by day by day. Oh, we had a drop out there. Sorry about that. D&D characters go from levels 1 to 20. Oh, got a tip coming in.
GM Scott tipped $25. Speaking of managing time, I have to go run my Tuesday night game. Catch you on the VOD.
Scott, thank you so much for that, and we'll definitely catch you on the VOD. Hopefully you enjoy it. You have to go run your Tuesday night game, so that is a totally valid reason to dip out. But thank you so much for that support, Scott. We love it. We're looking forward to we're getting together this Friday, and we're looking forward to crushing some mead, buddy. Or at least I am. Thank you, GM Scott. Appreciate that and all the support that you give us. Looking forward to Origins, buddy. Looking forward to Origins. So yeah, so you need to figure out a way for that to sort of, you know, to tie in. And again, as you know, as Ben was saying, there needs to be a balance between how much time passes and how much time passes in the game versus how much time happens in the real life. And what I was going to say is maybe this is just a D&D thing, but characters theoretically go from levels 1 to 20. And I think maybe there's a part of us, and I'm not saying this is true for everybody, and I'm not saying this is true for all instances. And I understand that non-standard humanoid races are very common nowadays, but back in the day, most people were humans in these RPGs. And I think there's a natural desire to want your character's arc from level 1 to 20 to kind of be like their career. And like what I mean is like your character starts off at level 1 as, you know, a young adult or, you know, an older teenager, fresh-faced, you know, just a neophyte adventurer looking to make a name for themselves. And there's this kind of, I think there's this deep-seated desire that by the time we reach level 20, that our characters are, maybe they're not 65, you know, literal Social Security retirement age, but our characters are done, right? They're like 45, you know, they're 50, you know, they have reached a point in their life where they could say, it's time for me to retire. It's time for me to step down. It's time for me to, you know, whatever, go join the monastery or become, you know, finally wear the crown upon a troubled brow and retire from adventuring for good. And that feels very natural for us because I think there's a sort of a cognitive disconnect because you go, okay, so my character was 19 years old and he was level 1. He was fresh off the farm and suddenly he's in the midst of the Age of Ashes. Now my character is not even 20 years old and they're level 20. They are one of the most powerful beings in existence. It just doesn't meld with how our lives work. It doesn't make any sense. It feels very video gamey and artificial, and it is very video gamey and artificial. So that's the problem. And so there's a natural, I think, desire for time and leveling to sort of follow themselves apart. Because you go, okay, so my character's level 20 and they're level 20. My character is 20 years old and they're level 20. What the hell are they going to do now? They're so young, right? And it kind of brings this question, like, what are all these level 20 characters doing? They're all level, you know, they're all not even 21 years old. They can't drink yet, but they can go solo pit fiends. It feels very weird, I think. And maybe it's weirder for us now, too, that we're older. You know, we're all in our 40s and 50s and, you know, our 30s or whatever. And so it feels a little bit strange. And I think there's a desire to want to be like, when my character is done with the game, it should feel like the character in the story, in the game itself, is kind of done with whatever it is that they were doing. And so I think that's where that kind of weird disconnect can happen because it can just feel very artificial because it is very artificial. And again, older versions of the game solved this perhaps very heavy-handedly, but solve this by having it take, you know, 1 or 2 months to level up to level 2, and then another 2 or 3 months to level to 3, and then so by the time your character was level 5, you know, there may have already been multiple years passing in the context of the game, and that makes a big difference. And I think if you add that on top of the sort of time-passing montages that I've been talking about, you could very easily get to a point where it's like, yeah, my character's now level 12, but they're also 36 years old now. You know, they've been doing this for 16 years and they have this lengthy history and it feels, even if you played the exact number of sessions as anybody else did, I'm telling you, it's going to feel like your character has lived more and done more and it's going to feel more lived in. Something that I've been, you know, I've seen for a long time. Now, KC asked a great question. He asks, how do you make room for downtime without ticking down all clocks? This is, by the way, one of the reasons why Ben doesn't like clocks. He likes clocks, but like as a sort of an encounter session resource. Ben, if I'm saying this wrong, please correct me. But one of the things he doesn't like is this sort of idea of this countdown mechanic. My players won't let any front go unchecked. They want to clear every quest from the backlog. I assume this comes from video games. Well, it comes from a couple of things. It comes from video games, absolutely, and the idea of wanting to get a complete clear and not leave anything, sort of resolved. But it also comes from the fact that presumably these fronts, these clocks, these problems, okay, are threats, and the characters are heroic, or they're good, or they're well-intentioned. Maybe they're anti-heroes, but they're well-intentioned. They don't want to just let bad things happen to the world around them. So the answer, KC, is you don't. We got a super chat coming in from Kyle. Cashing out my 401k and Roth IRA, all the loot I gathered over 20 levels to move to the Summerlands and enjoy my golden years. Exactly. Like if your character's going to retire, they should feel like they're ready for retirement, right? Like they've done their bid for king and country and they're done. If your character's only level 20, or if your character's 20 and they're 20 years old, it feels weird to do that. It feels weird to cash out your 401k. Thank you for that very generous support there, Kyle. That's very nice of you. Now, Karama says it's Chekhov's gun. The quest is there, so it might be done eventually. But I want to point out to KC, the key here, this is the key. You let them clear all the clocks. And then you basically say, because a lot of people go, well, what do I do? You got to keep the adventure going. Maybe you don't, right? If the group deals with this threat, and then there's this other threat, and there's a couple things, and then finally they get their thing, but they're not level 20 yet, or they're not done playing the system, or they're not maxed out actions and Blades in the Dark. When that moment happens, that's your end of the movie. It's not necessarily the end of the series. It's not the end of the series, but it's the end of the movie. The clocks have all been complete. This is a natural stopping point for us to go 5 years later and maybe do a session where we talk about what happened in those 5 years, and don't just make it meaningless. One of the things that I really like about Legend of the Five Rings is it talks about the 3 different types of scenes. One of them, of course, is conflict scenes, which are like your combats, round-based, kind of very time-sensitive. The second are your narrative scenes, which are sort of more like your exploration scenes. And the third scenes are called downtime scenes. And downtime scenes could be a quick montage of an entire evening, but it could also be the passage of a year or two. And one of the things that they tell you, okay, is if a year or more passes or something like that, ask the characters what they were doing during that year. Award them some experience points. Let them level up a skill or take a new technique. Maybe they go and train with some monks, and when they come back, they now have some monk talents or powers. The game is like, it's fine. It doesn't matter that the characters got better or they gained something or they did something. So to my understanding is, if there's some clock out there that is like horrible, evil thing waiting to happen, then John tips $10. The goal bar being 5 off with triggering my OCD, but he pointed out he wanted it to go to the tip bar. All right, here's what I'm gonna do. Let me I gotta find my stupid thing. Let me swap that out for you. All right, so I'm gonna put $5 of that dollars to tips. I'm gonna put $5 of that dollars to super chat. All right, there we go. Well, thank you everybody for tipping, and thank you. We're $10 away from a Sunday stream, and we have completed our stream. Bob and I are going to get together and do a co-op. Now, of course, we won't be in the studio. We'll have to be, I don't know, maybe we'll be in the same room. Maybe we'll be the bar, or maybe we'll just be on Zoom. But I appreciate you guys coming out and supporting us and wanting to see that kind of content. And thank you to everybody who did that. So to my point, going back, clocks are like the GM saying, here are the problems that are going on in the world. If the group solves all those problems, instead of feeling like that's a loss and that the game is over, that is a great stopping point. And by the way, it's also a great stopping point to sort of do a level check with your party members. If we were playing Blades in the Dark, KC, and we had a bunch of clocks going, and then the party managed to deal with all of them, and they had their own, and we're like, okay, you guys have kind of beat this movie. All right. Number one, it seems like a great natural stopping point. If we were to end the campaign here, nobody would complain. Sure, we would always wondered, what would it have been like if they had made a second or third Matrix movie? Boy, that thing was good. But alas, they didn't. But we would be very happy with the story and the campaign that we just had. So it could be that that is a natural stopping point. And instead of our game withering on the vine and dying off, when Aaron and I were talking about what campaign we were going to run, one of the ideas we had was to play 4th edition. And everybody, including at least me, but everybody, but especially me, was a little hesitant to sign up for a 30-level 4th edition game. Because it does go to level 30. But I was like, but you know what? Let's just kind of do a heroic campaign. And that's level 1 through 10. And we'll try to tell a complete story in 1 to 10. And when that campaign ends, that's like the movie credits rolling. And then we can make a decision. Is everybody good with that? That we've been playing this for the last, 6 to 8 months. We could call it quits. But if everybody's having fun and everybody's engaged with their characters and everybody wants to kind of see what happened with the one guy that got away or whatever, then we can keep it going. But what we can do is in between, that's where we can put in those long interludes, because effectively the group has beaten all the fronts. They've completed all the clocks. And so either that means it's a good place for the campaign to end, or it's a great place to take one of those long time eliding montages. And, think of it as a winter phase from Mouse Guard, an opportunity, don't just hand wave it and go like, okay, 5 years later, and here's the next adventure. Don't do that. Take a session, talk about what happened, go offline, use Discord or whatever. And make it meaningful, make it mechanical. Use it as maybe take a week or 2 off and sort of really to sell that this is time passing, an opportunity for you as a GM to sort of go back and say, okay, what are the long-term consequences of the party's actions, right? They did a lot of good, but did any of those things have unintended consequences? Or was, think of like, it's very specific, but think about Kuvira, right? From season 3 of Avatar Legends, or not Avatar Legends, Avatar Legend of Korra, right? Kuvira is this like minor NPC that they kind of meet, and then they stop Zahir and all this other stuff. But in the extent, the spoiler alert, but the Earth Kingdom gets thrown into chaos. So when we pick it up in season 4, Kuvira is now the sort of main villain, and she becomes the main villain. And it's sort of repercussions from what had happened in season 3. So like that's an even better example. If we look at season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4 of like Legend of Korra, and that's a great example of how you can have the same characters and some of the same challenges and some of the same issues, but each season is its own complete story. And in between, you get a lot of time passing. There's a lot of time that passes between those different seasons of the game. And I really like Ben's idea here. Taking an in-real-life break during an extended in-world break is a great idea. Just play another game for a few weeks. That's a great way to do a quick palate cleanser. If you've been playing a bunch of Avatar Legends, you're really enjoying the PBTA game, but you reach the end of your season and everybody's still really rearing to go. They're really excited about their characters. But PBTA could be kind of intense, and it's a very specific type of gameplay. So maybe you do take a couple weeks off and you go and you play, some Pathfinder 2, and you just get into some grid-based combat and hack and slashing and killing a bunch of goblins, and you bust out your minis and you bust out your grids, and everyone's like, yeah, you know what? I did miss this a little bit, and this is a nice touch for me. But also, more importantly, it's a great litmus test. If the group goes, you know what? We're actually really enjoying this, and we're kind of good with where Avatar ended. That is a legit story that you told. Sure, you never got a second season, but you could always come back to it. And your first season was a success. You started it, you delivered on it, you finished it, you closed it, you ended it, right? You delivered. Good. Done. We want to do a second season? Great. This is like a test. If the group goes, you know what? I've been having fun with the PBX, Pathfinder Extreme for those people, Path Builder Extreme for those who don't know what it is. Which is where people just play Path Builder and then go fight really tough fights. We do this on our Discord. If your group does that for a couple of weeks or a week or 2, and then they go, you know what, we really want to get back to season 2. Great. That means that the group really does want to be there. They're bought in. They want more. So that just tells you that that's a great way to sort of temperature check your party. I mean, look at some of the shows on television. Stranger Things. I mean, how long is it between seasons? A year, or more. So people are used to this sort of passage of time. And by the way, a season of Stranger Things sometimes takes place over a couple of weeks, right? Give or take. And then usually there's like a time jump right at the end where they kind of show like the epilogue. And then the next season typically starts the next year, high school year, or the next school year for those characters. Harry Potter does the same thing. And there's a reason that they do that, because it feels right and it makes sense. So, because I do agree, like if you're in the middle of an adventure and you're like, 5 years pass, that could be a little weird. That could be a little strange. If you have all those active clocks that KC was talking about and you suddenly decide to take off 10 years, that not only is that weird, but it can also put a lot of stress and pressure on the GM, because now you have to figure out what is going to happen in 10 years or 5 years of all this stuff happening. And it's just a lot of processing power that you have to deal with. Best done, maybe not during the middle of the session and on a planned schedule. So this is the pace of play that my party had been used to for many, many years. We would go and we would play D&D and we would play an adventure, and the group might gain a level or two. And then the adventure would be complete. And then they would kind of like get to go and do their own thing for a while. They might, they might journey and to buy magical items, or they might craft magical items, or they might just do anything, crazy stuff. It didn't, it depends on what sort of fits their fun. And this is very similar to Mouse Guard. I know I brought Mouse Guard up a lot of times, but Mouse Guard has this kind of idea of like the GM's turn and then the player's turn, and then the GM's turn and the player's turn. And in theory, they're kind of operative in the sense that the GM's turn is the GM saying, here are some challenges that you have to deal with. And then once the players have dealt with those challenges, their reward is, and now you guys get to do stuff. Blades in the Dark uses the same exact, Forge in the Dark games use the same exact process, where the score is this kind of very tightly compacted in time moment. It's almost a moment to moment. There's no real montages or extended montages during a score. It's kind of intense, immediate action. But once the score is finished, we move into downtime phase. And this is a phase where you can say weeks pass. You could say months pass. It all depends on the style and tone of your game. But if every clock that you have is an immediate game ender, then it doesn't work that way. But I know there's a temptation, one of the tip of advice I would give, I'd give this to myself, by the way, if I could go back in time. So I'm not just, don't feel bad if this is you. So many GMs overdo it with the level of threats in their game. We've been corrupted by movies and video games and adventure paths, and we basically are like, every threat has to be existence ending. Every threat has to be level 25, end of the game, gonna destroy existence, gotta go fight God in space. And so when you have these like literal world-ending threats, and it's kind of like right from the beginning, level 1, the world is going to end in some number of weeks. Of course, we're going to have problems with time passing. You need to think smaller. You need to think more locally. And I know it's so tempting to want to ratchet up the tension. Oh no, there's an even bigger boss. Oh, there's an even more important, scary thing that's going to happen. Oh, you're totally fucked. Don't you feel the tension? Isn't this game so much more exciting now because of the tension? Maybe no. I love the idea of a campaign. Like, think about Indiana Jones, right? Indiana Jones is a professor, right? He's not a raider. That's like his it's like his side hustle. He works as a professor, and he occasionally goes and does these like kind of like jobs, if you will, for the museum, partially out of his own curiosity, partially out of his own desire, but partially, I'm sure, financially. But obviously he holds down like a 9-to-5 job well enough to be a professor at this college. So the idea is that like Indiana Jones isn't an adventurer. Indiana Jones is a professor. He's a teacher who just occasionally goes on adventures, and I think a lot of times players incorrectly sort of, they try to be adventurers who then have this secondary job, and it feels really, really strange. Like, let me give you a great example of this. It's because of these adventure paths and the pressure. Okay. Bob, dwarf from Rise of the Rune Lords, Asius, the whole shtick of him was that he owned a bar. He wanted to own his own bar. But like, it doesn't really work when you have these kind of like super pressures, right? Because what ends up happening? Well, you're like, okay, well, your character wants to own a bar, but we can't really focus on that because the world is going to end, or at least, everyone you care about is going to end because the Rune Lord is coming and it's going to destroy the earth, and Gozer is coming, is going to destroy the earth, or whatever the case may be. And so you don't get that opportunity, and it seems really weird that your character would be focusing on a bar, and would they be spending time there running a business? And the game has business running rules, and you're like, this doesn't even make sense. This feels so incongruent. What I like, though, is the opposite is flipping it. Imagine that the stakes weren't world ending, and imagine that the adventures were more compartmentalized. And the idea is that like Asius the dwarf does run a bar, right? And he keeps his massive maul right there above the bar, right? On hooks, ready to go. And and it's been a couple of years since he's seen the old crew. And then one day, a familiar face comes into his. Now, by the way, Asius in our example here is like level 3 or 4. Maybe the group went on 2 adventures, a couple years ago, and then he went back to running his bar. But then after a couple of years, one day, a familiar face comes in, right? It's Exeter and Egregius, and they kind of smile at him, and there's a new person with them because somebody else decided to make a new character or something like that. And they're like, he's like, he smiles and he's like, it has been getting a little bored around here lately. And, he shouts off to his wife to say, honey, watch the bar for a couple of weeks. I got to go adventure. Takes his maul off of the top of the bar, and he goes and he joins his companions, and they go on this crazy adventure, right? They go on the Indiana Jones movie. They go on Temple of Doom. They go on Raiders of the Lost Ark. They go on Last Crusade. And then, things happen in a relatively short period of time, measured in days or weeks. Or maybe months. But when it's done, the idea is that, Asius isn't level 20. Nope. Asius the dwarf he's now level 6 or 7 or 8. And he comes back to his bar and he hangs his maul back up on the thing. And maybe some things have changed. Maybe other things have changed. And then you get these great moments of like, no. He's not an adventurer who owns a bar. He's a bar owner who sometimes goes and adventures. To me personally, that is way more interesting. I could be wrong here. I know I have really weird tastes in RPGs, but to me, that makes a lot more sense to me. I just want to get caught up here a little bit on chats. I apologize if I missed anything. Obviously, I try to get to all the super chats and stuff like that. But let's see here. If you're familiar with the video game Wildermyth, I am most definitely not. I don't really play video games. It has a lot of mechanics that develop the long haul life of adventurers and heroes. Well, that is very cool. And a lot of people seem to think so. Mindblown wants a Waffle House stream. That could be arranged. There's a Waffle House right down the street from me. Also gets super anticlimactic to do anything at all once you save the world. It's funny that you say that, Woodland Fellowship. One of the inside jokes for a group for a long time was when we played back in the 90s, we played Dragonlance, and the group, destroyed the great dragon and saved the world and all this other stuff. But like, for whatever reason, like the campaign didn't end immediately. And so then like, there was this joke about like, so what are we going to go do now? Like, are we going to go like guard sheep? Like, what do our characters do? We've saved the world. Like anything else that we do seems like it's just so anticlimactic. So I agree with you on that. You're making me want to recreate the Indiana Jones movies in Candela Obscura. I still need to read Candela Obscura. Elia says, very much agreed. Endless ultra stakes are straight up exhausting. A lot of the time I find the more personal and down to earth threats a lot more compelling anyways. And I agree. Not every threat has to mean everything to the world, but also too, just realize if you keep putting more and more and more things on the PC's plate, they will respond to that and they will go, okay, I'm not going to take any personal time. I'm just going to keep going and going. And then your game can become very stressful, and I think that giving them the opportunity. And this is why I talked about where, I blamed the adventures, right? I think I've done a good job of describing why adventures, in particular adventure paths, are very bad at allowing time to pass. And then I also talked about system And I talked about the fact that some systems are designed. We talked about the problems with leveling and the incongruency there versus something like Fabula Ultima or Avatar Legends, which has more of these mechanics built into it. Apparently, Wildermyth, the video game, does this very well. So system can matter, but also too, system matters because if the characters are going to take all this time off, it should mean something. It should be for some reason. If the game is so obsessed with balance and stuff like that, it's like, well, you can take all the time off you want, but it can't do anything for real because that would actually destroy the game. Then that also is a problem. But we talked about the game masters, but I also want to talk about the players. Because in order for time to matter, the players need to be proactive. They need to have things that they want to go and do. Part of the reason why my Blades in the Dark games and my Scum and Villainy games have been so successful is because my players are chomping at the bit to get to their downtime actions after a score, so that they can take the coin and the rep and the whatever that they've earned, and they can use their downtime actions to push their agendas, what they want to see in the game. As a matter of comparison to this, the last 5th edition campaign that I played in, not ran, but played in, was Aaron's 5th edition campaign, and it was very heavily house ruled. And in that game, we had immense amounts of downtime, many months. But Aaron, basically, in the spirit of Blaze in the Dark, had essentially these long-term project clocks. And in Blaze in the Dark, my general rule is, I'll let you change or do anything you want in the campaign. You can change the rules, you can change whatever. The long-term project is a way for you to sort of in-game, in character, in the fiction, house rule the game. So, for example, in Aaron's 5th edition campaign, my bard spent many months and many tens of thousands of gold researching ancient texts and finding this hieratic order of monks and going and meditating with them. And he opened up his character's 4th chakra. And basically what it did is it allowed my character to attune to 4 items, not 3 in 5th edition. And by the way, before the campaign ended, I did this again, and this time it was even more extreme. And I opened up my character's 5th chakra, and I was able to attune to 5 items. Now, does that break the game? I mean, yes, it obviously is more powerful than 5th edition intended it to be. But this is one of the reasons why I always say I kind of like 5th edition, because you can do that, and sure, it does mess with the game, but the game, what is there to mess with? The game kind of almost doesn't do anything anyways, right? So doing that in Pathfinder 2, though, that could be problematic because the game does have these really tight balance in math. So I really do like systems that let you kind of just, play with the space and let them do stuff. But the most important part there is, as a player, I had things that I wanted to do, both for my character mechanically, but also in the game, in the fiction. And if you go back to my 4th edition example, Tim really wanted his character to have this cool mercantile empire. It was just part of the fantasy of his character. And so for him, going on adventures and gaining levels was just a means to an end. It was a means to an end to have the power, the money, the resources, the money especially, the contacts to enact this vision. Now, we weren't using clocks back then because I didn't know about them yet, but like you could essentially see it as, he was trying to fill up his clock. Karima, $10, finishing off our Sunday, a super secret system stream, super chat goal, because that's what 4S stands for. It's actually 5 S's. It's Sunday, super secret system stream. And it's just, it's our Sunday streams that are usually pretty on the low key, unannounced. And we usually talk about a system. We'll do a first look or we'll do a deep dive. Traditionally, I've done those on Sundays, usually because, they don't do as well, and it's not part of our regular programming, but mostly just because it's just because of what we do now. So, Karima, thank you very much for that. I'm sure everybody else is going to be jazzed about that because we haven't had a Sunday stream in a little while, so this will be a lot of fun. But thank you for that support, and thank you everybody for reaching both of our goals. This is fantastic. Let's see here, John. Good to see John here. John. Happy you're still with us, buddy. This is actually why I stopped playing much PF2. My players expect every encounter to be both meaningful and teeter the line of death. PF2 just doesn't support that well, in my opinion. And John, this has nothing to do with time, but this is the other thing about the game too. How can I phrase this in a way that makes sense? If I'm playing a dungeon game, like one of my classic mega dungeon games, the group has plotted throughout the course of the week, and they go, we've got this kind of daring heist planned. We're going to go into level 2. We're going to stone shape our way through that one stone wall because the wizard used locate object, and we're pretty sure that the ruby sword is on the other side of that wall. Okay? So we're going to go in, we're going to go through the stone wall, then we're going to get past the basilisk. We're going to drop the darkness. We're going to drop the darkness spell, and then you're going to drink the potion of tremor sight so that you can still see, and then you're going to grab it, and we're going to get out of there, and we're going to go, and that's it. That's the player's goal. That didn't actually happen. I'm just making that up. Although something similar has happened. But at that point, the player's objective, the player's goal is to get the ruby sword. And so in that session, if the group encounters something, let's say a trivial encounter, right? Something that isn't particularly meaningful, and it doesn't teeter the line of the death. They're not upset about that. In fact, they're happy about that. Good, we don't want any problems. Our goal isn't to have nail-biting combats right now. Our goal is to kind of get in and get out. And if the GM rolls a random encounter and it's kind of a easy encounter, we're thrilled about that if we can deal with it really quickly before it causes us any problems. And that's because the player's goal in this instance is to get the thing. Anything that distracts from that is actually it's an annoyance. When your group isn't being proactive, when your group is basically going, I show up at the D&D session or at the Pathfinder 2 session in order to have cool combats and good encounters, maybe that, are meaningful and teeter the line of death so I can really feel something. Then if you have that same type of encounter, that trivial or low encounter, to use Pathfinder 2 lingo, maybe even a moderate encounter in a lot of instances, where the group goes, yeah, I came because I wanted to have these really exciting combats. That wasn't a really exciting combat, and we didn't have any real exciting combats, so the session was kind of pointless to me. That's a problem, because your group is not engaging in that way with the fiction. They're there for the game mechanic. And so this is where that can become really, really a problem in Pathfinder 2, and rightfully so. That I don't think it's just your group. I think a lot of people play Pathfinder 2 and they go, once you've gotten okay at the game, or if you're a reasonable gamer, you go, anything under a severe encounter is basically a waste of everyone's time. It is very, 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 very unlikely that anyone is going to truly permanently get killed in any of these encounters. And regardless of how many resources we expend, and by the way, we shouldn't really have to expend any resources other than maybe hit points, and we can recover those fairly freely after the fact. So this was really just a speed bump. The only reason we were in this combat was so that we could be in the combat order and, get a turn and take our 3 actions and use our mechanics that are on our character sheet in order to engage and feel cool and do the thing. It's kind of like my most recent MMO experience is like WoW, World of Warcraft. But, it's like World of Warcraft, you go through the dungeon, and what do you call it? You call it trash mobs. They're not a threat. They're never going to kill you. They're just there to make it take longer and filler time. And then you get to the boss, and that's a more engaging combat. And that's where you have to actually pay attention and actually cast heal or whatever, or, use your powers. And then it's back to another, 20 minutes of filler content as you, rampage through yard trash mobs, and then rinse, repeat. So, in some ways, Pathfinder 2 does that. Pepper says, I remember in an old 5e game, my PC's family were suddenly in danger while we were in the middle of dealing with existential threat. And I was just like, oh, great, just another thing from my pile. And you know what, Pepper? And here's to be honest with you, I have messed this up myself. And I've had campaigns burn out because I put too many plates, too many spinning plates in the PC's hands. And they really, they themselves became sort of despondent And I wanted them to like, I wanted to be tough, and I wanted them to have to deal with the threat and the pressure. And that's a common problem that I have. And a lot of times the party members respond by basically either checking out and going, there's so much going on, I don't even care anymore. It's almost like a form of like shutting down. Or they sometimes, my group and I have a very long-standing, mature relationship. They will come to me and say, Derek, we've been enjoying this campaign, but it's gotten a little bit too much, and I think we want to take a break and then try something new. And I'll be like, oh damn, okay, that'll happen. And that happened actually in my Scum and Villainy campaign. I twisted the screws too much, and the group was kind of like, this is too much. And I was like, damn, that is kind of for real. Constant high stakes is a feature in horror games. But I agree, it can be draining if you don't change it up. I mean, to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why I don't think I've ever really wanted to play in a horror game. Because I feel like that constant, like, we're never winning. It's always going to be like another thing, a horrible thing. And I do think it can be, especially for someone who doesn't have the knowledge of the genre as well. I love Dread, but Dread is literally designed to be one session of play. If that was like every week, I think it would just destroy me. I think it would just bring me down. Something PF2 is better when your players are bad at it. Something. Yeah, I mean, for the most part. I mean, that's not necessarily true, but I mean, it is the case that most players will optimize the fun out of any game. That is true. That's not a Pathfinder 2 problem. That's just all games as a problem. Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about, I don't know, Colin wasn't here, but I mean, we talked about system, we talked about adventures, we talked about GMs, and we talked about players. I mean, for me, those are, and that kind of stories and philosophy hopefully sort of express how I feel about time. I love the passage of time, part of the reason I've enjoyed the campaigns I've enjoyed the most are the ones that took place over a very long period of time. As a result, they just feel more lived in. They feel more real to me. I love the montages. Again, I don't want you to just literally hand wave it and not make it important. But some of my favorite things is being like, an adventure ends and you go, what do you guys do for the rest of the summer? What do you guys do for the rest of the year? Some games this is literally Northern Reaches was designed to take this concept from Mouse Guard and bring it to the game. The idea was that people were going to be really, really focused on playing Pathfinder 2 and get to level 20 or whatever right near the end of the season, have this really intense session of play for 8-9 months of play. And then we literally called it the winter phase because the idea was we wanted there to be that tension break and we wanted to give the campaign time, like in-game, years to pass and have like the world change because of the intense actions that happen. Because remember, in Northern Reaches, it's real time. One day in the Northern Reaches is one day in our game world. So a season of Northern Reaches is literally just an 8-month period of time in the game. Now, to be clear, it's still Pathfinder 2 and it's still modern game. So characters go from level 1 to 20 in 8 months. I mean, nothing to be done there. But the most important thing is that the campaign story, when the campaign ends, we have this 2 or 3, 4 month break, right? And of course, famously, usually it ends up being more like a 4 or 5 month break. And during that time, we advance the world. We give players a chance to, ideally, we'd love for them to like share stories and talk about the last season and ideas for the next season. And then we start the new season. And so the idea is that it feels like this progression of time. Even if your character is new, if you've been there since the beginning, you've seen, a decade or more when you go into when we start season 3 here, hopefully in the next, couple weeks, you will have seen a decade or more of changes happen to Northport and to the Northern Reaches. And you were there for that. And some of your characters were there to enact that change, or there were things that the group failed at. And that's what, spent. And in fact, the Northman Challenge was sort of designed as actually, Karama, a sort of a tip of the hat also to Mouse Guard, because the winter phase is supposed to be this period of time where you don't go on adventure because you're little mice and the winter is very dangerous. But they do say that like occasionally, you know, a very dire threat will emerge and the wizards will have to go, or the mice will have to go and adventure in the winter phase. And it's very brutal and it's very challenging and it's very deadly. But Northman Challenge was the idea of like, what if people adventured in the winter phase? And that was kind of the whole idea of that. But yeah, that's exactly right. I think Derek nailed it. Awesome. My players want Final Fantasy 13. Pathfinder 2 is designed for Final Fantasy 1. Story Railroad versus a dungeon crawl. Yeah. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, there are definitely different games for that. Now let's talk about space-time. It may not surprise you to know that I am fairly well-versed in both general and special relativity, as well as Einstein's field equations. So while I am certainly no physicist or astrophysicist, nor do I pretend to be one, I could probably speak fairly eloquently, actually, about space-time, black holes, gravitational waves, time cones. Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty good working knowledge, I would say, of space-time, generally. Optimizing is half the battle. I mean, fun. And you know what? There are different games for different people, and it is absolutely the case that for some people, the fun of the game is optimization. It's just sad because a lot of times those players end up getting resentful because they focus so much time and energy into a game because they want to be the best at it. And then they kind of realize, I actually kind of don't need to be the best at it to just kind of trivialize the game. And then that can feel like you kind of wasted your time. Not everybody feels that way, but some people do. I do. You know, if a game is like, I don't want to say too easy, but you know, like I will never feel that way about Magic because no matter how good I've been at Magic, the Gathering, you know, my win rate has never been above, 70%. So there's always, more to learn. I'm never just like, oh, I'm just dominating this and I've got the best. And then just when you think you've got a handle on things, right? The format changes, a new draft set comes out, and now you kind of have to go back to first principles and you have to go back to basics and you need to learn kind of from the beginning. I mean, your core tenets are understood, but now blue was the dominant color. Now it turns out blue's shit and you should be drafting green, white. So that's part of the reason I love Magic the Gathering is not only is it an impossible game to truly optimize, and there is no true optimization. It's usually designed, a well-designed format is designed to be a series of rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. This deck beats that deck, beats this deck. But then the format rotation also ensures that the game stays definitely vicious and feral. Do a Doctor Who first look. The problem with that is I know nothing. I know nothing about Doctor Who. I know that he travels around in a phone booth, and it's called a TARDIS. Do I know anything else? I know that Gillian, the girl that played Nebula, was in Doctor Who too at some point. Karen Gillian, and it's played by a different actor. It's British. I also know that it's British, but it was on Sci-Fi Channel for a while. Skipped it every time. I do lots of time jumps in my Call of Cthulhu game, and I think that's important. I mean, that's great. I mean, I think if you do them and you do them well, and they feel like it's earned, or not just hand waving time to hand wave time, but because of the events that happened and the time that passed, I think that those can be very, very effective, very powerful. One of my favorite time jumps in recent movie history is the Avengers Endgame movie, which opens kind of right after the other movie ended, more or less. It's almost like a direct continuation. So it's kind of subverting the expectations a little bit. And then they go and they quickly find Thanos and they kill him. And you're like, wait, so what? And then it fades to black and it fades again and it fades in and it says 5 years later. And you're like, oh, wow, that has so much weight. And, they've had to live with this, and then when we see the characters again, they are different. They have changed. The world has changed, and that's what makes that, I think, movie so great. That whole series of movies, but that movie in particular was really, really good. Feng Shui owns this space in terms of gamifying it. My knowledge of Feng Shui is not quite up to snuff. Doc, good to see you. Dan, yes, not mouth guard. Nice little. That's a funny spell check error. Mouse guard, right? Again, we talked about this. It is proceduralized such that you can only adventure for so many times before the time actually advances to the next season. And that seasonal change isn't just fluffy role playing. It's like the challenge types change, the weather challenge types change, the objective DC of the challenges changes depending on the season, level people optimize FFG. Oh, I know they do. And that blows my mind, buddy. It blows my mind. By the way, Damien, I forgot to message you. I wanted to know what you thought about the recent Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games corporate restructure, bankruptcy, debt consolidation thing. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You usually seem to have a pretty good beat on that. Jackal Tormoon's just got level 4 with his dwarf cleric on Quarsh. That's awesome. I love EverQuest. We're going to play EverQuest, actually. Again, Bob and I have just been so busy getting everything out of the studio. Again, then we're completely empty there. But we're not set up at all. Let me be very clear about this. To Aaron's basement is still just Aaron's basement. But we are going to, now that everything's out and we're not going to get in trouble with our landlord, we're going to take some of the items, cameras, some mics, and we're eventually going to figure out a way to set up Aaron's basement such that it's not going to be ever as cool as studio, but we're going to get there. But in the meantime, the plan is to use some of these Tuesdays, or maybe, who knows, maybe it'll end up being a Sunday night or something like that. But whatever's good for Bob and Aaron, basically. Their time is a little bit more valuable and precious than mine. And we're going to play some EverQuest just for a couple weeks, mostly to troll Bob. Let's be honest. Mostly because Aaron and I, nostalgically love the game. But also just because for us, it's a palate cleanser. I talk about this all the time on this channel. We talked about it tonight, but I've also talked about palate cleanser campaigns. For us, this is a palate cleanser. The studio has been our life for a long time. It has occupied way too much of my mental space for the last couple of years in terms of money and building things and setting everything up. And God knows, some of you were here for all like the audio issues and then having to change for like a month. I changed the audio setup every single week. And so for me, it's like I need a palate cleanser. So anyways, there's going to be somebody who wants to soullessly min-max its mechanics. No, not forward. We play it in the past. Oh, okay. Well, that's even more bold. That's even more assumptive. I mean, either way, though, it's giving you a sense of the scale of things, right? And I think that's what's important. It's one of the reasons I like flashbacks in Blades in the Dark. Even if you don't necessarily like that mechanic, I like flashbacks because it allows you in the moment to show that more time has passed and that your character is existing in this space and this time in a way that feels more lived in. Yeah, well, remember I spent last week, while you guys were off drinking and partying and gambling, I spent last week casing this place. And I would come by here every day and I'd get a drink over at that bar and I'd watch it from sunrise to sundown. And I know this place like the back of my hand. And I know this guard patrol. So all we have to do is wait. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, there he is. And now we have a 3.5 minute window, right? Like I like that because it even if it is backwards facing, it still shows that time has passed. In regards to time, this is where Kingmaker 2nd Edition fell really flat. Do not know Kingmaker 2nd Edition. The timescale changes were very jarring. Again, jarring is something to be avoided. I've always wanted to run a crazy opening scene in a TTRPG, then cut back to 8 hours earlier to show how we got there. So there is I think it's actually right here. So there is this RPG. You can see this is it has a label called Danger Patrol, and on top of it this is an interdepartment delivery manila envelope from an insurance company which does not wish to be named. Anyways, that's how old this is. There is a game that we used to play at cons all the time. It's by John Harper. I don't know if you can even find it anymore, but maybe you can. It is called Danger Patrol, and these are the character sheets, and they are. These are the character sheets, and these ones are laminated because they're designed for one-shots, and they're designed to be written on with a dry erase marker. Anyways, so you basically shuffle these up, and then you put them together, and you get a complete character. But one of the things that we used to do with this is we would start the session, and I would go like, this week on Danger Patrol, and I would go around the table, and I would have each character or each player basically like give us a scene from what was going to be the session that we were about to play. And then the challenge of the session was for all of those scenes to make sense and come to a head and come to a fruition. So it was like it was like not a flashback, it was a flash forward. And we'd start the session with it as sort of like on a TV show where sometimes you get like the last time on Danger Patrol or last time on Battlestar Galactica, but sometimes it'll be like this week on this show, and then you have these like almost these little trailers, these little snippets, these little vignettes to hook you and get you interested, like a trailer. So it's like we started the sessions with a trailer basically of our session, and then we would have to figure out a way to play it to this point. And the one I distinctly remember was like Smith. I don't remember what he was. He was like a psychic commando or something like that was his character. And he was describing, and we saw his character was psychic commando. So we immediately thought Ghost from StarCraft. And so he described his scene where he's like, all right, so there's like a wave of like these bug monsters rushing towards me. And I'm just headshot. I'm like, come on, you sons of bitches. Is that all you got? And like, that was what he gave me to work with. And like, again, I have no idea what the session is going to be like when the session starts. And then somebody else gives me a scene and somebody else gives me a scene. And my job as a game master and their job as players is we all know where we're sort of, where the tendrils and the threads are working towards so that we can make all those scenes happen. And so it's almost like I had a checklist of like, okay, well, that has to happen at some point. That has to happen at some point. That has to happen at some point. And that was really, really funny. And that was really, really fun. And anyways. Let's see. I love the Civ mechanics in Pathfinder, but man, oh man, going back and forth between adventure mode and kingdom mode was so weird for everybody. And I imagine it would be, especially if it's being done in a very jarring way and in a very unnatural way. And I think that could be very problematic. I mean, this is part of the reason why in original D&D, it's like you adventured for like 8 or 9 levels, and then you had a lot of money, and then you became a lord. And the idea was that like adventuring at that point was, again, where you're taking your sword off of the wall and you're going on an adventure. But most of the time, for many, many months or years at a time, you are the grand wizard master of the tower. You are the guild master of the Thieves Guild. You don't go out every weekend to go adventure, I do think it is more common in more games now. I agree. I think because people have realized that it's really, really cool. Ben says, that's great. Fitting all the preview scenes in the session sounds like a lot of fun. Great way to manage the spotlight too. Yeah, well, it's like letting the player set up the scene that they want to see their character in. But of course, Aaron being the shit stirrer that he is, there was like a moment earlier in the adventure, well, like halfway through, and we hadn't done his scene yet. We hadn't gotten there in the story. And like, they were really in trouble. And I was like, basically like, how do you get out? And Aaron went like, he's like, well, I mean, I know we're fine. So obviously we get out of this moment. And I was like, how do you know he's fine? He's like, because my scene hasn't happened yet. He's like, I'm psychic. So I know that that's going to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. So I guess we're going to be okay. And we can get out of this scene. I was like, all right, you got me. You win. But again, it's just a one shot and it's just for fun. But it is a really cool system. It's really fun. It's very, like Buck Rogers-esque. So like you can see like every character has their weapons, you can have a ray gun or an electro blaster or a turbo rifle. Everybody has a rocket pack. You have your your silver and red uniform and stuff like that. So it's very much like a 1930s Buck Rogers kind of esque style or tone to the game. Anyways, fun stuff. All right. Well, again, Colin asked for this. Again, we did talk about campaign management and times and calendars and keeping track of all that. And I still think that stuff is really important, by the way. If you want time to matter, you do need to have some way of tracking it and measuring it and have something that the players can reasonably go off of. I think I said this in that last video, which was called All the Damn Time. But there's nothing wrong. You don't have to do this, but there's nothing wrong with just using January, February, March, April, May, June, July, right? Like, there's no, like when you start naming your months like Electoire followed by Kundwa, like it's cool, but like people are just going like Tolkien. If it was good enough for Tolkien to just say it's September 21st, it's good enough for me, and it should be good enough for you. I gave Forbidden Lands a pass because Forbidden Lands has 8 months. They are, you ready? Spring rise, spring wane. Summer rise, summer wane. Fall rise, fall wane. Winter rise, winter wane. That's it. And it's the 4 seasons, rising or waning. Perfect. That's fine. I can manage that. Real words that mean something. I think when people try to make time too wonky, it's pretty crazy. But like I said, we do have another video where we talked about some of the more logistical mechanics for tracking time, both on a long-term period and a short-term period. So I definitely would go check out that video. Maybe I'll link it in the description below. All the damn time. We did do that. But for tonight, it was kind of more of a philosophical idea. And I do think that there's a lot of value to that. And I do, it's something that I really aim to do in so many of my games. And again, even in games like the examples I gave, even the examples I gave, like in my 4th edition campaign, which had none of the, there's so many games, that exist now that have all these really great, cool things that allow you to create these cool moments. Like what Ben was saying with Avatar, with Fabula Ultima, or even with Blade Runner, or in my experience with some of the Forbidden Land stuff, and having these cool things that can actually make the world feel like time matters. And so that's great. But I'm saying, like, we did it in 4th edition D&D, and that game doesn't have anything resembling that, And so you just gotta have the right mindset. And I think a big part of it, as I said, the players, the GM, the system. But the number one reason, and that was my first story, the number one reason is the adventures themselves, or the adventures that you're making. They are just paced way too aggressively. The threats are never ending. They're existential. They cannot be ignored, but not by anyone of good conscience, or even maybe from selfishly, because it's going to be the end of the world. So even if your character was being selfish, the world's going to end anyways. Those aren't threats that you can really, ignore. And so you can't, so you don't. And that means that time can't pass because, and then you're going to keep playing, you're going to keep leveling. And then before you know it, it's been a month or two and your character is nearing level 20. And it can feel really, really strange. Derek, I do that all the time as well. Certainly in games like, Blades in the Dark, I'll do that pretty much every time a score is over because that's what downtime is. But like in Legend of the Five Rings or something like that, like when the group returns, when they return home from Otosan Uchi to their sort of their daimyo's lands, and I'm like, all right, well, you guys return, and there's not really celebrations because you're samurai, you just did your job, but like, what do you get back to doing, and what do you do? And Smith's like, I immediately go to my forge and I begin working on a passion piece of a katana, sort of incorporating some of the events that happened into my blade work. And it's like, okay, great, cool moment. And maybe at the end of that, he makes a check, or maybe he has a new katana or something like that. But it's cool because it reflects what happened, but it also shows that this isn't something that takes place over a course of days. This is something that maybe take place over the course of weeks. And sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. And again, sometimes it could even potentially be years. But the difference is, I would say, like, okay, I'm going to give everybody 5 XP, which is a lot in that game. It's like a session's worth of XP. Spend it on skills or training, but let me know why. Like, what were you doing during that time, and how did you spend that whole year? I think that's really great. So yeah, so cool stuff, good stuff, and we're wrapping up here right about 9 o'clock. So I want to say thanks to everybody. We had a lot of people come out tonight, more people than I thought we were going to have. We have some nice tips and super chats. So we got a couple of streams coming up for you guys. We'll get that poll up for the patrons for first look. Although I might bias it and just say I'm going to pick from one of these because sometimes people want a first look that, quite frankly, I'm not really that interested in doing. Thank you, Ben, for the tips. Thank you, Karima, for the super chats. Thank you, John, for the super chats. Kyle for the super chats. GM Scott for the tips. And thank you to our new subscribers as well. Thanks for everybody for coming out. Thursday may not be a stream. We have to actually find out. Thursday, my mom is going in for a surgical exploration procedure, and I have to take her, and it's going to be really early. So I have no idea like how long I'm going to be at the hospital all day, and I don't know if I'm going to want to stream. We'll see. But it is it is a good stream, but time is up. Yes. However, I will see you Sunday. We'll be back. So the super secret system stream Sunday is not so secret because we did reach this goal. So we'll make that up. And again, the patrons will have a say in maybe what first look we're going to be taking care of. So thank you, Ben. Again, at this point, it's over out of an abundance of caution that they're going to be taking a look at her lungs. But we'll take it one day at a time, as we always do. Thank you for the stream. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jackal. Thank you, Ayla. Thank you to all our patrons who support us each and every single month. If you're interested in being part of these fine people's daily lives and conversations, if you want to talk about nothing but RPGs with people who are really, really smart and really, really nice, but also not going to blow smoke up your ass, maybe you should check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Knights of Last Call. Link in the description below. You get a couple different options depending on where you want to support us at, and those come with a variety of different tier rewards, but they all give you access to our Discord, which is private, and that also means that you'll be able to play games in our numerous community games, which run 24/7, 7 days a week. And we had like a Traveler, a Legend of the Five Rings, and I don't even know what the other game was playing just yesterday. So it's not just 5e and PF2. Although if you do want to play PF2, we've got Northern Reaches coming up soon. TBD, but soon. As always, NR, soon, trademark. So for that and for everybody else there in the community, I want to say thank you for joining us. And we will see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace out.